I was 16 years old when my mother told me to step out of our family photo at Yellowstone National Park. "Morgan, honey, why don't you wait over there while we take this one?" she said, with that tight smile that never reached her eyes. The symmetry would look better with just the four of them. I stood frozen as my mother's stepfather Richard and my half-siblings Abby and Tyler arranged themselves perfectly against the stunning backdrop of mountains and geysers. The park photographer gave them instructions, while tourists nearby watched me shuffle awkwardly to the side. I tried to look casual like I preferred being excluded, but inside I was crumbling. I never imagined that 10 years later those same family members would be desperately seeking my attention, watching my every move from the sidelines of my success. My family wasn't always so divided. When I was little, it was just Mom and me, in our small apartment in Springfield. My biological father left when I was 3, disappearing to start a new life in California with his secretary. I barely remembered him, just flashes of a deep laugh and the smell of mint gum. My mother worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat, and despite the struggle, those early years held some of my happiest memories. We had movie nights with microwave popcorn and built blanket forts in the living room. Mom would tell me I was her special girl, her perfect little sidekick. Everything changed when I was 7, and Mom met Richard Baker at a company picnic. He was handsome, stable, and most importantly financially secure as a regional bank manager. Their whirlwind romance led to marriage within 6 months. Suddenly, I wasn't just Morgan anymore. I was part of the Baker bunch, as Richard liked to call us when introducing our newly blended family. Richard had 2 children from his previous marriage, Abby, who was 9, and Tyler, who was 11 when our parents married. They lived with their mother on weekdays and stayed with us every weekend. From the beginning, I could tell they viewed me as an intruder in their father's new life. They had inside jokes I couldn't understand, and traditions with Richard I wasn't part of. But I tried. And I tried so hard to fit in. "Hey, want to play Monopoly with us?" I'd ask, hovering near their bedroom door during their weekend visits. "We already started," Abby would answer, without looking up. "You can watch if you want," Tyler might add if he was feeling generous. I'd sit cross-legged on the floor beside them, pretending it was just as fun to observe as to participate. My mother never intervened. "They need time to adjust," she'd say. "Don't push." But months turned into years, and the adjustment never seemed to happen. Instead, something else occurred. My mother began to change. She started styling her hair like Abby and Tyler's mom. She adopted their family traditions and favorite meals. She referenced their mother in casual conversation. "Amanda always makes that casserole for the school potluck. It's their favorite." The rules were different for me, too. My step-siblings could leave dishes in the sink, but I was scolded for the same infraction. They received larger allowances because they're older, even after I reached the same age as they had been. When I brought this up, my mother would pull me aside. "Morgan, please don't make waves. Richard does so much for us. Can't you just be grateful?" I withdrew into myself, spending more time in my room with books, and later my camera, a 12th birthday gift from my grandmother Linda, my mother's mother, and the only person who seemed to see the subtle shifts in our family dynamic. As my 16th birthday approached, I dared to hope things might improve. Mom and Richard planned a small party at our house, nothing extravagant but more than we'd done in previous years. The morning of my sweet 16, I came downstairs to find my grandmother had already arrived, helping Mom arrange cupcakes on a platter. There's the birthday girl, Grandma Linda, called, wrapping me in a hug that smelled of her signature rose perfume. The celebration was pleasant enough, with a handful of friends from school joining us for pizza and cake. Richard gave a toast, raising his glass of sparkling cider. "We have an announcement to make," he set, his arm around my mother's shoulders. "Next month, we're taking a family trip to Yellowstone National Park." My friends oohed and ahed appropriately, while I felt a genuine smile spread across my face. A real family vacation. Maybe this was a turning point, a chance for us to bond. Later, as I was helping clean up, I overheard Grandma Linda in the kitchen with Mom. "Diana?" I was looking at the reservation confirmation that was on the counter. It only listed 4 names. Was Morgan's left off by mistake? There was a pause before my mother responded, her voice low. It wasn't a mistake initially. Richard made the reservation for just him, me, and the kids. I had to call and add Morgan afterward. What do you mean the kids? Morgan is your child? Grandma Linda's voice had an edge I rarely heard. You know what I mean, my mother sighed. Abby and Tyler. It's complicated with Morgan. She doesn't really fit with the family dynamic. She complicates things. I froze in the hallway, a garbage bag of discarded wrapping paper clutched in my hand. The cupcakes I'd eaten turned to cement in my stomach. Diana Marie Walsh. I did not raise you to Grandma, Linda began. But I didn't stick around to hear the rest. I crept back to the dining room, my mind reeling from what was apparently my family's worst-kept secret. I wasn't supposed to be on this trip at all. I was an afterthought, a complication. That night I cried into my pillow, the excitement of the vacation replaced by a hollow ache. Still, I resolved to make the best of it. Maybe if I tried harder was more helpful, more cheerful, more whatever they wanted me to be, things would change. I was 16 now, practically an adult. I could make this work. I had no idea that the Yellowstone trip would only confirm what I had feared all along. The drive to Yellowstone took 2 full days from our home in Missouri. I packed light and prepared a road trip playlist with songs everyone would enjoy. I'd researched highlights of the park and kept a small notebook in my pocket where I jotted down fun facts to share. I was determined to be the perfect travel companion. Did you know Yellowstone has more than 10,000 geothermal features and almost 500 active geysers? I offered from the back seat as we crossed the Wyoming state line. Fascinating, Richard replied flatly, not taking his eyes off the road. Tyler, move your backpack so Morgan has more room, my mother said, glancing back at me, wedged between my step-siblings and their belongings. It's fine, I insisted quickly. I don't need much space. Abby rolled her eyes and pushed her earbuds deeper, turning up her music until I could hear the tinny beat escaping. Tyler was engrossed in his handheld game. I pulled out my journal, a leather-bound book Grandma Linda had given me for the trip, and began documenting our journey. Day 1, I wrote, on the road to Yellowstone. First real family vacation. Feeling hopeful, we arrived at the park on a perfect June afternoon. The sky stretched endlessly blue above the pine forests, and steam from distant geysers rose like spirits from the earth. Our cabin was rustic, but comfortable, with 2 bedrooms, one for Richard and Mom, and one with bunk beds for us kids. I'll take the floor on the sleeping bag, I volunteered immediately. You guys can have the bunks. Thanks, Morg, Tyler said, using the nickname he knew I hated, tossing his duffel onto the top bunk. That first day we hiked to see Old Faithful and explored the visitor center. I took dozens of photos with my point and shoot camera careful to include everyone equally. I even asked strangers to take pictures of all 5 of us together. Mom and Richard stood in the middle with Abby and Tyler on either side of them. I was always on the far edge, as if I might be cropped out later without disrupting the composition. On our second day at Yellowstone, we drove to Artist Point, one of the most photographed vistas overlooking the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone. The lower falls cascaded in the distance, a ribbon of white against golden rock. Tourists clustered along the viewing area, capturing the majestic scenery. A park ranger with a professional camera was offering to take photos of visitors with the spectacular backdrop behind them. Gather together for a family photo, the ranger called to us cheerfully. Its complimentary park service likes to capture happy memories. Richard nodded enthusiastically. Great, come on, everyone. We moved toward the designated spot, and I positioned myself on the end next to Abby. The ranger motioned for us to shift closer together. That's when my mother touched my shoulder. Her fingers pressed lightly, guiding me backward and away from the group. Morgan, honey, why don't you wait over there while we take this one? She said. Her voice was sweet, but firm. The symmetry would look better with just the 4 of them. You know, the matching family. I blinked, certain I'd misheard. What? It'll just take a minute, she continued, her eyes darting to the other tourists nearby. Then we can take one with everyone. I looked at Richard, Abby, and Tyler already arranged in their positions. Tyler was staring at his shoes. Abby had a slight smirk. Richard checked his watch. Diana, we should hurry if we want to make it to the mud pots before lunch, he called. No one contradicted my mother. No one said, "That's ridiculous. Morgan belongs in the photo." I felt like I was moving through molasses as I stepped away from my family. The ranger looked confused but didn't comment as I moved to stand by a nearby bench. "Perfect," the ranger said to the remaining 4. "Beautiful family. Now smile." The shutter clicked once, twice, 3 times. Each sound felt like a tiny bullet hitting my chest. Tourists around us were watching now, some with puzzled expressions. A woman nearby gave me a sympathetic glance that made my cheeks burn with humiliation. "Great, now. One more," the ranger said, adjusting his angle. My mother's voice rang out clear as a bell. "Just one more of the 4 of us, then we need to get going." They never took the everyone photo she had promised. As they thanked the ranger and collected their things, I stood rooted to the spot, fighting back tears and the urge to run away into the wilderness. Instead, I walked woodenly behind them back to the parking lot, maintaining a precise distance, not close enough to be part of their unit, but not so far that I'd be called out for lagging behind. That evening, while everyone was at dinner in the lodge restaurant, I stayed back in the cabin claiming a headache. In reality, I couldn't bear another meal of watching them interact like a perfect family while I sat like an exchange student nobody had really wanted to host. I pulled out my journal and began writing about the day, pouring my hurt onto the pages. "I don't understand what I did wrong," I wrote. "Why am I never enough? I try so hard to fit in, to be good enough for them to want me around. Maybe if I were more like Abby or funnier like Tyler. Maybe if I looked more like Richard instead of having Dad's eyes." I fell asleep on my sleeping bag, the journal open beside me. When I woke, the cabin was dark, and everyone had returned. My journal was gone. Panic fluttered in my chest as I searched around my sleeping bag. Had I tucked it under my pillow? Left it in the bathroom? I checked everywhere quietly, not wanting to wake the others. The next morning, I continued my search in the daylight. As I was grabbing my toiletries for a shower, I noticed the cabin's small trash can was fuller than it had been the night before. On top was an empty bag of chips Abby had been eating. But something caught my eye, a corner of familiar leather peeking out from beneath the trash. I pulled my journal from the garbage, my hands trembling. As I flipped through the pages, my blood ran cold. In the margins of my most vulnerable entries were comments written in different handwriting, Abby's looping script and Tyler's messy scrawl. Next to my entry about trying to fit in, "Try less. It's sad." Beside a paragraph about hoping this trip would help us bond in your dreams. "Dad only brought you because Grandma guilt-tripped Mom." Near my insecurities about my appearance, "At least you see the problem." There were crude doodles, 2 stick figures of me standing outside a circle labeled Real Family. A cartoon of me crying with the caption, "Poor Morgan, nobody wants." I sank onto the floor, the defaced journal clutched to my chest. How could they be so cruel? And how could they think so little of me, that they didn't even bother hiding their vandalism properly? When the others returned from their morning walk, I confronted them, holding up the journal with shaking hands. "Did you read my private journal and write in it?" My voice was barely steady. Abby and Tyler exchanged glances. "It was just sitting there open." Abby shrugged. "If you don't want people reading your stuff, don't leave it out. And you wrote these things and threw it in the trash." I pressed, looking from one face to another, finally landing on my mother. Mom looked uncomfortable. "Morgan, I'm sure they were just joking around. You know how siblings tease each other." Teasing, I opened to the most hurtful comments. "This isn't teasing, Mom. This is mean. This is bullying." Richard sighed heavily. "Let's not create a drama on our vacation." Abby, Tyler apologized to Morgan so we can move on. "Sorry you can't take a joke," Tyler muttered. "Sorry you left your stupid diary out," Abby added. I looked at my mother, waiting for her to say something more, to tell them that wasn't enough, that their behavior was unacceptable. But she just gave me a pleading look. "Morgan, they've apologized. Can we please enjoy the rest of our trip? We're going to see the Prismatic Springs today, and I know how much you wanted to photograph those." In that moment, I realized no real consequences would ever come for Abby and Tyler. No meaningful boundary would ever be set. I was expected, as always, to absorb the hurt, to get over it, to not make waves. I nodded mutely, tucked my vandalized journal into my backpack, and followed them out to the car. But something had shifted permanently inside me. The fantasy that I might someday truly belong in this family had begun to crumble like the eroded cliffs surrounding us. The weeks following our return from Yellowstone were quiet on the surface. I went through the motions of family life dinners at the table, polite responses to questions about school, helping with chores. But inside, I was retreating further from them. With each passing day, my mother must have sensed the change because she made occasional attempts at connection. "I thought maybe we could go shopping this weekend," she offered one Thursday in July. "Just us girls. We could get you some new clothes for junior year." "Thanks, but I already made plans with Emma," I lied. Emma was a casual friend from photography class, not someone I regularly hung out with. But my mother wouldn't know the difference. She barely kept track of my social life anymore. The rejection of the family photo played on repeat in my mind. The symmetry would look better. The matching family. Those phrases had crystallized everything I'd felt for years but couldn't name. I wasn't just an outsider in this family, I was deliberately excluded. A visual disruption. A genetic anomaly in their perfect picture. My isolation at home intensified as summer progressed. Invitations to family activities became less frequent. When Richard decided to take Tyler fishing one weekend, no similar father-daughter activity was proposed for me. When my mother and Abby started taking spinning classes together at the local gym, I wasn't asked if I wanted to join. Most painful were the family dinners that happened without me. I'd come downstairs to find them already eating the table set for 4. "Oh, Morgan, I thought you were studying," my mother would say, her surprise not quite convincing. "There's plenty if you want some." I'd grab a plate and join them, sliding into what increasingly felt like a guest's place at the table, catching up on conversations already in progress. About people and events that seemed to revolve in an orbit just beyond my reach. School became my sanctuary when fall arrived. I threw myself into my classes, especially photography. Mrs. Bennett, my photography teacher, noticed my intensity. "You've got a remarkable eye, Morgan," she told me, after class one day, looking through my latest portfolio. "You capture emotion in a way most students your age can't even see, let alone translate to film." I'd been working on a series called Invisibility Photographs of overlooked aspects of everyday scenes: a single shoe left under a park bench, condensation droplets on an abandoned coffee cup, a child standing slightly apart from a playground group. "These are powerful," Mrs. Bennett said, lingering on one image of an elderly man sitting alone in a diner booth while a large family celebrated at a table just beyond him. "You're saying something important here. Have you considered submitting to the Young Photographers Showcase?" With Mrs. Bennett's encouragement, I developed my portfolio throughout junior year. Photography became more than a hobby. It was how I processed my feelings, how I made visible the invisibility I felt. Through my camera, I controlled what was included in the frame and what was excluded. I decided what deserved focus. My grandmother became my biggest supporter outside of school. Every Sunday, I would visit her small house across town, often staying until evening. We'd bake together, watch old movies, or just sit on her porch swing talking about everything and nothing. "Your grandfather had a darkroom in the basement," she told me one day. "It's still there, though it needs some updating. Would you like to use it?" That basement darkroom became my haven. Grandma Linda helped me order supplies to refurbish it, and soon I was developing my own black and white photos. The process was meditative. The darkness, the careful timing, the magic of images appearing on blank paper. In the chemical bath, hours would pass without me noticing, and for those hours I wasn't thinking about my fractured family at all. "You remind me so much of him," Grandma would say, watching me work. He had the same focus, the same ability to see what others missed. My mother rarely asked about my photography or my time at Grandma's. When report cards came, she noted my straight, as with a distracted, "Good job, honey," before turning her attention to Abby's struggle with chemistry or Tyler's baseball achievements. As senior year approached, the distance between us grew wider. I started researching colleges with strong photography programs, all of them far from Missouri. I printed brochures and left them on my desk, a silent declaration of my plans to leave as soon as I could. My mother never commented on them. The breaking point came on my graduation day. The ceremony was scheduled for 10 in the morning. My name would be called early, as they announced the arts department honors first. My family arrived at 10:45. I spotted them slipping into the back row, just as the principal was beginning the general diploma distribution. They had missed my moment on stage, missed Mrs. Bennett presenting me with the Outstanding Achievement in Visual Arts Award, missed my short acceptance speech, where I'd thanked my grandmother and my teachers, but not them. After the ceremony, I found them in the crowded courtyard. My mother hugged me briefly. "Congratulations, honey. Sorry we were a little late. Abby couldn't find her shoes, and then traffic was terrible." Richard patted my shoulder awkwardly. "Good job, kiddo. You missed the arts awards," I said quietly. "I won the photography prize." "Oh, that's wonderful," my mother said, her eyes already scanning the crowd. "We'll have to get you something special to celebrate. But right now we need to hurry if we want to make our lunch reservation." The celebration lunch was at an upscale steakhouse Richard had chosen. As we settled into our booth, he ordered champagne for himself and my mother and sodas for us kids. "A toast," he announced when the drinks arrived, to Morgan's graduation and to Abby's big news. I glanced at my stepsister, who was practically bouncing in her seat with excitement. "We were going to wait until after lunch to tell you," my mother explained, "but we're just too excited." "Show her, Richard." My stepfather pulled out his phone and passed it to me. On the screen was a photo of a glossy red convertible with a giant bow on the hood. "It's Abby's graduation present," he explained. "She's had her eye on it for months. We're picking it up tomorrow." I stared at the image, then at Abby's glowing face, then at my mother. "Graduation present. Abby doesn't graduate for another 2 years. Well, technically it's for her 16th birthday next month," my mother clarified. "But since we're celebrating today anyway, we thought it would be nice to share the news." "It's a Mustang," Abby gushed. "Dad got an amazing deal through a client at the bank." I handed the phone back, my fingers numb. "Wow, that's some gift." "Now don't worry," my mother added quickly. "We'll help you look for something too when the time comes. There's the used Honda that Mrs. Peterson down the street is selling. If you save up from your summer jobs, we could maybe help with half." I nodded mechanically as the waiter arrived with our appetizers. The conversation shifted to Abby's upcoming driver's test and Tyler's summer baseball league. No one asked about my photography award or my college plans. That night, I sat on my bed, surrounded by graduation cards from relatives and teachers. One was from Grandma Linda, containing a check that brought tears to my eyes. $5,000, with a note, "For your future, wherever it takes you. I believe in you." I made my decision then. I would accept the scholarship to the New York Photography Institute that I'd been hesitant about because of the distance. I would move in with Grandma Linda for the summer to save money for the move. I would leave this house where I was forever the afterthought, the complication, the visual disruption in the family portrait. The next morning, I told my mother my plans over coffee. She was alone in the kitchen, the others still asleep. "New York," she repeated, her coffee cup frozen halfway to her lips. "But that's so far. I thought you were considering state." "I was," I said. "But NYPI offered me a scholarship, and Grandma Linda is helping with expenses." "Your grandmother knew about this before I did." I met her eyes steadily. "I talked to Grandma about a lot of things." Something flickered across my mother's face. Hurt, perhaps, or guilt. But it was quickly replaced by the practical efficiency that had become her default mode with me. "Well, I suppose it's a good opportunity. When would you go?" "August. But I'm going to move to Grandma's next week to work and save up over the summer." She nodded slowly. "I see. Well, if that's what you want." What I wanted was for her to fight for me. To ask me to stay, to promise things, would be different to acknowledge the years of subtle rejection that had pushed me to this point. But she did none of those things. "I'll start packing today," I said, rising from the table. "And Mom, I won't need help with a car. I'll figure it out on my own." As I walked away, I felt the final thread connecting me to this family begin to fray. By the time I reached New York 2 months later, it would be severed completely. New York City in August was a shock to my system. The heat rose in waves from the pavement, carrying the mingled scents of street food garbage and humanity. The constant noise car horns, conversations in dozens of languages, music spilling from storefronts was overwhelming after the quiet suburbs of Missouri. My dorm room at NYPI was tiny, barely fitting a twin bed and desk with a window that looked out onto an air shaft. But it was mine. A space where no one could exclude me, where I belonged, simply because I had earned my place there. The first semester was brutally difficult. The coursework was far more demanding than my high school classes had been. Technical assignments required precision and patience. Conceptual projects pushed me to defend my artistic choices to professors who had exhibited in galleries worldwide. And the city itself was an adjustment, navigating the subway budgeting for groceries 3 times as expensive as at-home learning which streets to avoid after dark. My roommate Jasmine was a film student from California, with purple hair and a collection of vintage cameras. Unlike me, she came from money. Her parents were both surgeons, who had bought her a loft apartment off campus for her second year. "You should totally move in with me when the dorms close for summer," she offered casually over ramen one night. "The place is huge, and it would be way cheaper than subletting." That first offer of friendship, casual, uncomplicated inclusion, nearly made me cry. I had been so used to being the odd one out that genuine connection felt foreign. Through Jasmine, I met other students, filmmakers, painters, designers who invited me to gallery openings and rooftop parties. I started collaborating with a fashion student named Drew, photographing his designs for his portfolio. I dated a musician briefly, then a literature student who wrote poetry about my photographs. All the while, I worked on developing my own style. My professors noted my preoccupation with isolation and belonging. "Your technical skills are excellent," my portfolio advisor told me. "But what's remarkable is how you capture the emotion of exclusion. There's clearly personal experience in forming this work." I took street portraits of strangers, focusing on people who seemed forgotten or overlooked. I photographed empty spaces that suggested recent human presence. I created a series on family dynamics, photographing groups in parks and at tourist attractions, focusing on the subtle body language that revealed relationships, who leaned toward whom, who stood slightly apart. Contact with my family back home was sporadic. I called Grandma Linda weekly, but conversations with my mother dwindled to monthly formalities. She rarely asked about my work, focusing instead on news about Abby and Tyler. Richard sold insurance now. Abby was dating a football player. Tyler made honor roll. I sent obligatory cards for birthdays and Christmas. I didn't go home for holidays, using the excuse of work, which wasn't entirely untrue. I'd gotten a job as an assistant to a commercial photographer, carrying equipment and adjusting lighting for product shoots. The pay was minimal, but the experience was invaluable. By my second year at NYPI, my work had begun to attract notice. A small student gallery featured 3 of my pieces in a group show. A local coffee shop hung a series of my street portraits, several of which sold to customers. My Instagram account, where I posted select images, gained a modest following. Then came the breakthrough I hadn't dared hope for. My urban isolation series, Alone Together, was selected for the school's prestigious annual showcase, where industry professionals scouted for new talent. On opening night, I stood nervously beside my photographs, wearing a vintage dress I'd found at a thrift store and boots borrowed from Jasmine. A woman in her 50s with silver-streaked black hair and dramatic red glasses approached my display. She studied each image carefully, making notes on a small pad. Without introducing herself, she asked, "What drives this perspective on isolation?" "It's remarkably mature for someone your age." I explained my interest in the paradox of urban loneliness, how people could be surrounded, yet disconnected. I didn't mention my personal history. "I'm Caroline Reed, fashion editor at Prism," she said, finally handing me her card. "We're doing a special issue on emerging photographers next month. I'd like to include your work. Can you come to my office next week?" Prism was one of the top fashion and culture magazines in the country. My hands trembled as I took her card. "Absolutely," I managed to say, trying to sound professional rather than shocked. That meeting led to a 4-page spread in Prism's Next Wave issue, featuring my work alongside a profile that called me a startling new voice in contemporary photography, bringing emotional intelligence to social documentation. The exposure from Prism led to other opportunities. A small solo show at an up-and-coming gallery in Brooklyn commissions for editorial, shoots an invitation to photograph a minor celebrity for an indie magazine cover. I moved into a small studio apartment in Bushwick, with money saved from these jobs, setting up a proper darkroom in what should have been a walk-in closet. By 24, I had established myself as a rising talent in New York's competitive photography world. My signature style, emotional, intimate portraits that revealed subjects' vulnerability while preserving their dignity had found its audience. I specialized in family portraits unlike any others, on the market honest, unposed images that captured authentic dynamics rather than forced smiles. A breakthrough came when a well-known actress hired me to photograph her blended family. The resulting images showing step-siblings with their biological and step-parents in natural, unguarded moments went viral when she shared them on social media. Morgan Walsh captures what family really means, the complicated, messy, beautiful truth of how we connect, she wrote in her post. Suddenly, my calendar was filled with bookings from wealthy families willing to pay premium prices for portraits that told their true stories. I hired an assistant, then a business manager. At 26, I moved to a larger apartment in a better neighborhood and launched my own website and brand, Authentic Vision Photography. A major profile in photography today, featured my work and personal philosophy. I'm interested in the space between people, what connects them, and what divides them. Traditional family portraits hide that space. I want to reveal it. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd built a successful career exploring family dynamics when my own family had effectively dissolved. Grandma Linda visited twice, staying in my guest room, and beaming with pride as she toured my gallery shows. My mother and I exchanged brief text messages on birthdays and holidays. I knew from social media that Abby had graduated college and Tyler was engaged, but they felt like distant acquaintances rather than siblings. I dated occasionally, but kept relationships casual. Something in me remained guarded, unwilling to risk the vulnerability of true belonging. My closest connections were with friends and colleagues who respected my independence. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday in March, an email arrived that would disrupt the careful boundaries I'd constructed between my past and present. Subject: Congratulations from an old friend. From Abby Baker. 93@gmail.com. Morgan, I just saw your amazing feature in Style magazine. The photographs are incredible. I've been following your work for a while now, and I'm just so impressed by what you've achieved. I'm actually in New York for grad school at Columbia. Would you want to grab coffee sometime? I'd love to catch up after all these years. Abby. I stared at the message for a long time, my finger hovering over the delete button. Abby had been following my career. The girl who had once mocked my dreams and written cruel comments in my journal now wanted to catch up. My first instinct was to ignore it. What could we possibly have to say to each other after 10 years? But curiosity mingled with a faint, foolish hope that had never quite died. Maybe people could change. Maybe there was value in confronting the past rather than just outrunning it. After 3 days of deliberation, I replied with a brief message, agreeing to meet at a coffee shop near my studio. As I hit send, I had no idea that this simple response would set in motion events that would finally bring me full circle back to the wound that had never properly healed, and perhaps at last toward genuine closure. The coffee shop I chose for meeting Abby was one I frequented often, a small, artsy place with good espresso and enough ambient noise to make conversation feel private. I arrived 15 minutes early and took a corner table with a view of the door, positioning myself like I would for a portrait shoot, back to the wall, subject entering the frame from the left. When Abby walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. The last time I'd seen her, she'd been a teenager, with long blonde hair and perpetually judgmental eyes. Now she was 25, with a sleek bob and professional attire. She spotted me immediately and waved with surprising enthusiasm. Morgan. Wow, it's really you. She moved toward my table with the confidence of someone accustomed to navigating unfamiliar social situations. As she sat down, I noted the designer watch the subtle makeup, the carefully casual yet expensive outfit. Abby had grown up to be exactly the kind of polished young professional I would expect from Richard Baker's daughter. "Thanks for meeting me," she said, setting down her leather messenger bag. "I wasn't sure you would." I shrugged, keeping my expression neutral. I was curious. Understandable. She smiled with what appeared to be genuine warmth. I would be too after all this time. "Should we get drinks first?" Once we had our coffees, an Americano for me, some complicated vanilla concoction for her, the awkwardness settled in. How do you begin a conversation with someone who was technically family but practically a stranger? Someone who had once participated in your exclusion? So we both said simultaneously, then laughed, despite ourselves. "You go," I offered. Abby nodded. "First, I just want to say, your work is absolutely amazing. That series you did for the Mercer Foundation, the foster families. It made me cry. You have this way of showing connection that feels so honest." The compliment seemed sincere, which caught me off guard. "Thank you. That project was important to me." "I bet." She took a sip of her drink, then set it down carefully. "I'm doing my master's in psychology at Columbia. Child development specifically. I work with kids from disrupted families." The irony wasn't lost on me. "Interesting career choice." She caught my tone and had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "Yeah, I guess it might seem that way. Actually, it's not unrelated to, well, to how things were with our family." I raised an eyebrow but said nothing. "Look, Morgan," she continued, her voice dropping slightly. "I know we haven't seen each other in a decade, and I know things weren't good between us when you left. I was a pretty awful stepsister to you. You were a teenager," I said, surprised to hear myself offering this partial absolution. "So were you," she countered. "And you weren't awful to anyone." I stirred my coffee, unsure how to respond to this unexpected accountability. What brought this on Abby? Why reach out now? She hesitated, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture so reminiscent of her teenage self that I felt a strange dissonance, past and present overlapping. "A few things. Seeing your success for one. But also..." She paused. "Things changed after you left. Mom and Dad. I mean, Diana and Dad. They split up 3 years ago." This was news to me. My mother hadn't mentioned a divorce in our infrequent communications. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, more out of social convention than genuine feeling. Abby shrugged. "It was a long time coming. They were staying together for the kids. But once Tyler and I were both in college, there wasn't much point in pretending anymore." She looked down at her coffee. "Mom's had a rough time since. Dad moved to Florida with his new girlfriend. She's 28. I couldn't help a small, sardonic smile. "Of course she is. Classic midlife crisis." "Right." Abby's smile matched mine, and for a moment, I could almost imagine we shared some sibling complicity. "Anyway, Mom's still in the house, but she had to go back to work full-time. She's an administrative assistant at an insurance company now." I absorbed this information, trying to picture my mother, who had so eagerly embraced life as Richard's wife and Abby and Tyler's stepmother, returning to the workforce after years of being supported. It was difficult to summon much sympathy given our history. Yet I couldn't help feeling a twinge of something like concern. How is she handling it? "Okay, I guess. It was harder at first." Abby fiddled with her napkin. "She talks about you, you know. Keeps track of your career." This surprised me. She's never mentioned following my work when we text. "Yeah, well." Abby pulled out her phone, scrolled briefly, then turned it toward me. "She keeps a folder of everything. Articles, interviews, exhibition announcements." Look, on the screen was a photo of what appeared to be a bulletin board covered with clippings. I recognized magazine pages featuring my photographs, printouts from websites, even the postcard from my first solo show, that I'd mailed home out of some sense of obligation. She's like your biggest silent fan, Abby said, taking the phone back. Too proud or embarrassed or something to tell you directly. I felt an unexpected tightness in my throat. The image of my mother carefully collecting and displaying evidence of my career. A career she'd shown little interest in when I lived under her roof. Stirred complicated emotions. She's tried to contact you more directly, Abby continued. Through Grandma Linda. But apparently your grandmother told her you weren't ready. This was true. Grandma Linda had mentioned several times over the years that my mother had asked about visiting me in New York or having me come home for holidays. I'd always declined using work as an excuse. Grandma hadn't pushed understanding that some wounds need more than time to heal. They need acknowledgement. Why are you telling me all this, Abby? She took a deep breath. Because there's something else you should know. The family is having a big reunion this summer for Great Aunt Meredith's 80th birthday. It's going to be at her estate in Connecticut. Everyone will be there. I vaguely remembered Great Aunt Meredith, my grandmother's wealthy sister, who had married into old money. We'd visited her sprawling home once when I was very young, and I prompted. And she's hired a photographer for the event. A portrait photographer for the family sessions. Abby's eyes met mine directly. It's you. But Mom doesn't know that yet. I nearly choked on my coffee. What? How is that possible? Aunt Meredith's granddaughter, our second cousin Jessica. She follows you on Instagram. When they were looking for photographers, she suggested you. The family hired you through your business manager. I don't think anyone made the connection that you're actually related since you don't use Baker as your last name professionally. My head was spinning. The coincidence seemed too perfect. Too contrived. And you knew about this? Abby nodded. Jessica texted me when she found out you were the Morgan Walsh who was coming to photograph the reunion. She was all excited about the connection. Mom has no idea. Neither does anyone else except me and Jess now. I sat back in my chair trying to process this information. The universe had a twisted sense of humor. After 10 years of building a new life and identity separate from my family, I was being pulled back by my own success, by the very career that had been my escape. When is this reunion? I asked finally. 2 months from now. Memorial Day weekend. I could cancel, of course. I could have my manager contact Great Aunt Meredith with some excuse about scheduling conflicts. But the photographer in me, the artist who had built a career examining human connection and disconnection, recognized the perfect symmetry of this situation. The girl who had been asked to step out of the family photo was now being asked to take the family photo. What do you think I should do? I asked Abby, genuinely curious about her perspective. She looked surprised at being consulted. Honestly, I think you should do it. Not for Mom or anyone else, but for yourself. Some kind of closure, maybe. She hesitated, then added more softly. And maybe because you're really good at what you do, and our messed-up family could use some of your honest lens. I studied her face, looking for signs of the manipulative teenager she had once been. Instead, I saw only a young woman who seemed genuinely regretful about the past. I'll think about it, I said finally. As Abby prepared to leave, she paused, reaching into her bag. I almost forgot. I brought something for you. She pulled out a small, worn leather book. I found this when I was helping Mom pack some things after the divorce. I thought you might want it back. She placed my old Yellowstone journal on the table between us, the same journal that had been defaced and thrown in the trash all those years ago. I was really awful for doing that to your journal, she said quietly. For what it's worth. I'm sorry. Really sorry. I stared at the journal, a physical artifact of the pain that had shaped so much of my life and work. After a moment, I picked it up and slipped it into my own bag. Thank you for bringing it, I said, and for the apology. As I watched Abby walk away, I realized I had a decision to make, one that would determine whether I continued to define myself by my exclusion from this family, or whether I was finally ready to view it through the more compassionate, complex lens I brought to my work. That night, I opened the old journal for the first time in a decade, confronting the cruel marginalia with adult eyes rather than a teenager's wounded heart. Among the pages, I found something I hadn't noticed before. A note in my grandmother's handwriting tucked into the back cover. My darling girl, sometimes the family we're born into isn't worthy of us, but you will always be worthy of love and belonging. Your eye sees truth. Trust it. 2 days later, I confirmed the booking for the Baker family reunion, without revealing my connection. It was time to face the past with my photographer's eyes seeing clearly, capturing truth, but from a position of power rather than vulnerability. Memorial Day weekend arrived with perfect weather, clear skies and gentle sunshine that photographers dream about for outdoor sessions. As I drove my rented car up the winding driveway of Great Aunt Meredith's Connecticut estate, I felt oddly calm. The nervous anticipation I'd expected had been replaced by a sense of professional purpose. Today I wasn't Morgan, the unwanted stepdaughter. I was Morgan Walsh, sought after photographer here to do a job. My assistant Zoe sat beside me checking our equipment list. She'd been with me for 2 years now, managing the technical aspects of shoots while I focused on creative direction and client interaction. "So this is a big family reunion?" she asked, glancing up at the imposing colonial house with its manicured grounds. "Must be some family." "You have no idea," I murmured, parking in the designated area for vendors. I hadn't told Zoe about my connection to the Bakers. As far as she knew, this was just another high-end family booking. I preferred to keep it that way for now, maintaining the professional boundary that would make it easier to get through the day. We unloaded our equipment and were directed to the back garden where a large tent had been set up for the celebration. The property was stunning, 5 acres of landscaped grounds surrounding the historic home with views of Long Island Sound in the distance. Perfect for the multi-generational family portraits Great Aunt Meredith had requested. My plan was simple. Set up quickly, complete the group sessions efficiently, and avoid prolonged interaction with my former family members. With over 50 relatives expected, I hoped my mother and I could maintain a polite, distant professionalism for the few moments our paths would have to cross. That plan dissolved the moment I stepped into the tent and saw her. My mother was standing near the dessert table arranging flower centerpieces. She was thinner than I remembered, with more gray in her hair, dressed in a blue sundress that looked new, but not expensive. She hadn't seen me yet. For a moment, I considered retreating, asking Zoe to handle the initial setup while I composed myself. But then my mother looked up, her hands freezing mid-arrangement as our eyes met across the space. Recognition, shock, and something else, shame perhaps, flickered across her face. She took a step forward, then stopped, clearly uncertain whether to approach me or give me space. I made the decision for her, nodding briefly before turning to Zoe. "Let's set up by the oak tree. The light will be perfect there for the large group shots." As we moved through the tent toward the garden, I felt my mother's gaze following me but didn't look back. The professional mask was my armor now. For the next hour, Zoe and I worked methodically, setting up lighting and backdrops for the various configurations of portraits on our shot list. Family members began to arrive in clusters, greeting each other with hugs and exclamations. I recognized some faces from childhood cousins, now grown elderly relatives, more stooped, but still animated. None seemed to recognize me, or if they did, they didn't comment on my presence beyond a polite acknowledgement of the photographer. Then I heard his voice. "Diana, there you are. Where should I put Jeanette's gift?" Richard Baker, my former stepfather, had entered the tent. He looked older, softer around the middle with less hair, and more tan, the Florida retirement effect. Beside him stood a woman who could only be the 28-year-old girlfriend Abby had mentioned, blonde fit, wearing a dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent. I ducked behind my camera, adjusting settings that didn't need adjustment. Through the viewfinder, I watched their interaction with my mother, the awkward greeting, the stiff body language, my mother's tight smile as she directed them to the gift table. Some things never change, I thought, remembering how she had always worked to smooth over uncomfortable situations to keep up appearances. "Morgan, is that really you?" I lowered my camera to find Great Aunt Meredith herself standing before me, elegant in a silk pantsuit despite being nearly 80. Her eyes were sharp as ever behind designer frames. "Aunt Meredith," I said, summoning a smile. "It's been a long time." "Indeed it has. When Jessica told me she'd hired the Morgan Walsh for our portraits, I had no idea it was our Morgan. What a delightful surprise. She clasped my hands warmly. Your grandmother Linda told me you'd become quite successful, but she didn't mention you'd be here today. It was unexpected, I admitted. I didn't realize the connection myself until recently. Aunt Meredith's eyes twinkled knowingly. Well, I couldn't be more pleased. Our little Morgan all grown up and making such a name for herself. We'll have plenty of time to catch up. But I know you're working. When should we gather for the first portraits? I explained the schedule, grateful for her matter-of-fact acceptance of my dual role as family member and hired professional. As she moved away to inform others, I caught sight of Abby, entering with a tall man I assumed was her boyfriend. She spotted me immediately and waved, then whispered something to her companion before heading in my direction. You came, she said simply. I had a contract, I replied, but without heat. She nodded, understanding the distinction. Mom nearly fainted when she saw you. She's been in a panic, trying to decide whether to approach you or give you space. I glanced toward my mother, who was now deep in conversation with an elderly cousin, though her eyes occasionally darted in my direction. Has she said anything to Richard about me being here? Just the basics, that you're the photographer, and he should be polite. He seems embarrassed more than anything. Good, I thought. He should be. The arrival of Tyler and his fiancée created another ripple of tension. Unlike Abby, Tyler had made no effort to contact me over the years. Seeing him now, a broader, more confident version of the teenage boy who had once mocked my journal entries, stirred old resentments. He did a double take when he saw me, then whispered urgently to his fiancée before giving me an uncertain wave from across the tent. As the reunion hit full swing, I slipped into professional mode, directing family groupings with quiet authority, positioning people for the best light and composition. Years of experience had taught me how to put subjects at ease, how to capture genuine emotion rather than forced smiles. Cousins from the Meredith side, please gather by the oak tree, I called, consulting my shot list. Extended family with all grandchildren, please assemble on the lawn steps. Each configuration proceeded smoothly, my camera, a barrier between me and the complex emotions swirling beneath the surface. Zoe handled the technical adjustments while I focused on the human element, finding the moments of authentic connection within the staged settings. Then came the listing I'd been dreading, Diana Baker, and immediate family. My mother approached hesitantly, followed by Abby Tyler and his fiancée. Richard and his girlfriend hovered uncertainly at the periphery. Should I? Richard began. Former spouses in separate shots, I said crisply, referencing my clipboard, as if this were standard protocol rather than my own hasty decision. Relief flashed across my mother's face. Just us three. Then she said, gesturing to herself, Abby and Tyler. I positioned them beneath a flowering dogwood, instructing them on posture and spacing with the same professional detachment I'd use with strangers. Through my viewfinder, I studied the three of them, my mother flanked by her stepchildren, the family unit that had remained after both Richard and I had departed. Relax your shoulders, I instructed my mother. Abby, angle slightly toward Tyler. That's better. As I adjusted settings for the shifting light, my grandmother's voice came from behind me. Shouldn't you be in this picture too, Morgan? I lowered my camera to find Grandma Linda watching me, her expression gentle but challenging. I hadn't known she would be here today, another surprise in an already overwhelming event. I'm working, Grandma, I said, the excuse sounding hollow even to my own ears. I'm sure your assistant can press a button, she replied, nodding toward Zoe. This is your mother and your siblings after all. Step-siblings. I corrected automatically. Family comes in many forms, she countered, as I believe your own work demonstrates quite beautifully. She was right, of course. My photography explored exactly that complexity, the chosen bonds that sometimes matter more than blood, the painful gaps between people who should be close, the unexpected connections that form, despite obstacles. Before I could respond, my mother spoke up, her voice uncharacteristically firm. Morgan should absolutely be in the photo, she said. If she wants to be. Our eyes met, and I saw in hers something I hadn't expected. Not pity or obligation, but genuine hope, mixed with the resignation of someone who expects rejection. Maybe someone else could take the picture, she suggested tentatively. So you can join us. The parallel to that long-ago moment at Yellowstone wasn't lost on me. The same request, but with positions reversed now. She was asking me to step into the frame I had once been asked to leave. I hesitated, my professional shield wavering. I have something to show you first, Grandma, Linda said, reaching into her large handbag. She pulled out a framed photograph and handed it to me. It was the Yellowstone family photo, the one I'd been excluded from. The perfect family of 4 smiled against the backdrop of the canyon exactly as I remembered it. But next to it in the double frame was another image I'd never seen before, a photo of me alone in the same spot taken just after the family had moved on. In it I was looking not at the camera, but at the departing backs of my family. My expression, a mixture of hurt and longing that made my chest ache even now. I had the park photographer take it, Grandma Linda explained quietly. I kept it all these years waiting for the right time. My mother stepped forward to see the framed images, her hand flying to her mouth as she recognized them. Oh my God, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. The tent had grown quiet, other family members sensing the emotional current running through our small group. Abby moved closer, peering at the photos over my shoulder. Wow, she said softly. That's painful to see. Tyler joined us, his expression somber as he took in the visual evidence of my exclusion. I remember that day, he said. I felt bad, but I didn't say anything. My mother reached out tentatively, her fingers stopping just short of touching my arm. Morgan, I am so sorry. Not just for that day, but for all of it. For every time I failed to stand up for you. For every time I chose to please Richard over being your mother. The raw honesty in her voice pierced through the professional distance I'd maintained all day. This was what I had wanted for so long, acknowledgement of the hurt, recognition of the wrong done to me. Would you consider being in a photo with us now? She asked. Not because you should or because it would make us look better, but because I'm proud to be your mother. I always have been, even when I did a terrible job showing it. I looked around at the faces watching me. My mother's hopeful, Abby, and Tyler's regretful. My grandmother's wise and loving. Then I glanced down at the framed photos again, at the visual representation of exclusion and isolation that had shaped so much of my life and art. Zoe, I said, finally turning to my assistant, could you take a few frames of this group? I need to step in for a moment. As I handed over my camera, explaining the settings briefly, I felt a weight lifting, not completely, but enough to allow me to move forward. I took my place beside my mother, conscious of the symbolism, but also of the genuine emotion rippling through our small family circle. Everyone relax, Zoe instructed, echoing phrases she'd heard me use countless times. Think about what brings you together, rather than what pulls you apart. As the shutter clicked, capturing this moment of tentative reconciliation, I realized that the real power had never been in who was included in the frame or who was excluded. The real power was in who controlled the narrative, and for the first time in my life, standing among the family that had once rejected me, that person was me. 6 months after the Baker family reunion, I stood in the center of the Aperture Gallery in Chelsea, surrounded by the fruits of the most personal project of my career. The exhibition, titled simply Belonging, featured 40 large-format photographs exploring family dynamics, chosen connection, and the spaces between people, both physical and emotional. The gallery was packed for the opening night, art critics mingling with photographers and collectors. My professional network had turned out in force, curious about this new, more explicitly autobiographical direction in my work. But it was the presence of certain guests that made the evening truly remarkable. My mother stood near the entrance, elegant in a navy dress I'd helped her choose, greeting attendees with a warmth that reminded me of her younger self. Abby and her now fiancé chatted with Jasmine, my old roommate, comparing notes on their respective graduate programs. Tyler and his wife, they'd married in a small ceremony last month, examined a triptych of sibling portraits, heads tilted in identical angles of concentration. Grandma Linda moved through the space like royalty, proudly introducing herself as the grandmother of the artist to anyone who would listen. The centerpiece of the exhibition, displayed on the main wall, was a diptych that told the story that had defined so much of my life. On the left, the original Yellowstone photograph of my mother, Richard, Abby, and Tyler, the matching family I'd been asked to step away from. On the right, a new self-portrait taken during a solo trip back to Yellowstone last summer, standing in exactly the same spot. But now, looking confidently into the camera, the canyon, a majestic backdrop to my solitary figure. Between these images hung a third larger photograph, the one Zoe had taken at the reunion, showing my mother, Abby, Tyler, and me in a moment of genuine if tentative connection. The triptych was titled Exclusion Divided by Reclamation, Divided by Reconciliation, and it had already been featured in several arts publications as a powerful exploration of family trauma and healing. "It's extraordinary work," said Caroline Reed, the Prism editor who had given me my first major break years ago. "So much more emotionally complex than most family portraiture. There's honesty here, but also compassion." "I had good subjects," I replied, watching my mother across the room. Our relationship remained a work in progress. 10 years of distance couldn't be bridged in 6 months, but we were trying. Weekly phone calls, occasional visits, small steps toward something new. After the reunion, my mother had asked if she could come to New York to see where I lived, how I worked. Her first visit had been awkward but necessary, both of us navigating the strange territory between our past and potential future. During her second visit a month later, she'd sat for a portrait series that became part of the Belonging exhibition, raw, honest images that captured both her regret and her resilience. "I never should have asked you to step out of that photo," she'd told me during one of our conversations. "I was so afraid of losing Richard, of disrupting what I thought was my chance at a perfect family, that I couldn't see I was destroying my real family in the process." "Why did you keep track of my career all those years?" I'd asked her. "The clippings, the articles." "Because I was proud of you," she'd answered simply. "Too ashamed of myself to tell you directly, but so proud of what you were achieving. Every time I saw your name or your work, it was like a reminder that you had survived my failures as a mother, that you had turned pain into something beautiful." Now, as guests circulated through the gallery, I watched her approach the centerpiece triptych, studying the images with a thoughtful expression. I moved to join her, standing quietly beside her for a moment before speaking. "What do you think?" "I think," she said slowly, "that you've created something true. Not easy or comfortable, but true." She turned to look at me. "You always had that gift, seeing what was real, even when the rest of us were pretending." Before I could respond, a staff member approached holding a package. "Miss Walsh, this just arrived for you. The messenger said it was important you receive it tonight." I accepted the small parcel wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. There was no card, no indication of the sender. Curious, I unwrapped it there in the gallery. Inside was a leather-bound book, new but similar in style to the journal I'd kept during the Yellowstone trip. Opening it, I found a note written on the first page in my mother's handwriting. "For recording new memories. I'll be here this time to listen." The remaining pages were blank, a fresh start, an open future. I looked up to find her watching me, uncertainty and hope mingling in her expression. "Too much?" she asked softly. I shook my head, unexpected emotion tightening my throat. "No, it's perfect." A photographer from an arts magazine approached, asking if he could take a photo of me with my mother in front of the triptych. As we positioned ourselves, I felt her hesitation. "Are you sure you want me in this?" she whispered. "Yes," I said firmly, putting my arm around her shoulders. "The story isn't complete without both of us." As the flash went off, capturing this moment of reconciliation for a publication that would reach thousands, I realized how far we had come from that day at Yellowstone. The excluded child had become an acclaimed artist. The mother who had failed her was now humbly seeking redemption. The family photo that had once symbolized rejection now served as the foundation for healing and growth. Later that evening, after most guests had departed, I gathered my family, mother, step-siblings, grandmother, for a private toast in the quiet gallery. "To belonging," I said, raising my glass. "Not the kind that comes from matching or fitting in, but the kind we create by seeing each other truly and choosing to connect despite our imperfections. To belonging, they echoed glasses clinking in the space that was filled with images of both separation and connection. My exhibition became my most successful show to date, launching a book deal and a lecture series on visual storytelling and family dynamics. But more valuable than the professional accolades was the personal transformation it represented. I had turned the pain of exclusion into art that helped others feel seen and understood. I had reclaimed my narrative, transforming myself from the girl who was asked to step aside into the woman who controlled the frame. And I had discovered that sometimes the most powerful form of belonging isn't found in perfect family photos, but in the messy, complicated process of seeing and being seen, hurting and healing, leaving and returning. Have you ever felt excluded from your own family? How did you handle those feelings, and were you able to find healing? If you connected with Morgan's journey, please leave a comment below and share your own experiences. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories about overcoming family struggles. And if you know someone who might need to hear this message of hope and reconciliation, please share it with them. Thank you for listening to my story. May you find your own sense of belonging, whether with the family you were born into or the one you create for yourself.